Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a Ranger belt. This is a belt that we haven't addressed yet on this channel. We've done a lot of belt videos, whether that's slicking edges, how to stiffen a belt as far as adding some material in there to give it a little bit more body, putting one together, and obviously tooling them. And I don't know why we haven't done a Ranger belt video, but we had to make a Ranger belt here the last couple months, and I put it on my list because it's a really good one. There are some differences in making these that you don't have to worry about when you're making a regular trophy buckle style belt or a regular tapered belt, and there's also a little bit more work involved with these, obviously, because you've got the billets. Now, what defines a Ranger belt is going to be the fact that the belt body has attached two separate billets that are sewn on to the top of the body of the belt once it's done. You've got one to hold the buckle and either one keeper or two keepers, and then on the other side you've got the billet with the holes in it. And then when this belt is worn, the big part of the, or the longer part, the whole side of the body goes behind the buckle part into a keeper, and that stabilizes that together and holds that together. And then this billet goes through a buckle and buckles in and then goes through the keepers. The only drawback to a Ranger belt is that sometimes they can add quite a bit of bulk in front of the person wearing it right there. And so I'm going to show you some tricks on how I try to reduce some of that bulk when we build one of these. The other thing to keep in mind is that you want these billets to be even from side to side when the person's wearing it. If it's the proper size for them and they're in the center hole in the belt, these should be even, and I'm going to show you how to do that. It's much like we do on our tapered belts. But like I said, the Ranger belt's been around a long time. Usually these would be a customer that's got a really nice high-end sterling silver buckle set that they've had made, maybe a piece of custom iron as far as the buckle and keeper, and they're going to usually wear that sometimes with jeans, but a lot of times with slacks or even a Western suit or just a regular suit. Very popular style. And I do have cowboys that wear these. I've made these many times with just rough out with a gunslinger stitch or slick out with that. Maybe no stitching, just plain. I do have a lot of customers that actually prefer a Ranger belt on a daily basis. So it's a good option to have. It's good to be able to do this. I've had a few people call over the last 4 or 5 months as well, asking how to measure somebody for a Ranger belt versus measuring them for a trophy buckle belt or regular standard belt. I'm going to show you how to do that in this video. Let's get started. All right, guys, so we're over here at the workbench. The way we're going to build this Ranger belt is pretty much just like you're going to build any other belt as far as your leather selection, because the body of the belt is going to be just the same. It's going to be a piece of 9/10 ounce with a piece of 3/4 ounce liner if you're going to line it. If you're not going to line this belt, then I would suggest going up to about a 10 to 12 ounce on your body material, and that way you've got just a little bit heavier belt. I think 9/10 is a little bit light for a single ply belt, but I have made Ranger belts like this for like a dress belt, or you're going to wear with slacks and that kind of thing, and that is a good weight. But if you're building a cowboy style Ranger belt, the guy's got a nice custom piece of silver he's going to put on for the buckle set, I would go ahead and try to get closer to that overall somewhere between 11 and 12 ounce finished weight. So that 10 to 12 ounce is going to work great if you're doing it single ply. But if we're going to line it, we're going to go ahead and do it just like we do our other belts, 9/10, 3/4 on the bottom. So I've got that. I'm doing the same width that I do on all of my belts. Now you'll find a lot of Ranger belts sometimes are 1.25 inches. I've even seen them 1 3/8. I keep them 1.5 inches. That's the size that I use. That's the size that I think is proper for a Western Ranger belt. The other thing that we need to cut for this belt is going to be the billets. So you're going to cut a billet here. This is the buckle hanger, so it'll have a slot here. It's good. This is going to be for actually hanging the buckle and the keepers, whether you have 1 or 2 keepers. This pattern does fit either one. You can use either one there. And I would always set up your Ranger belts for the option of doing 2 keepers, because a lot of Ranger belt buckle sets, a real nice high-end silver buckle set, a lot of those will come with double keepers. If they do, you don't want the belt to not have that option. So always make your keeper a little bit longer here, or your hanger, to where you have that ability to have both those keepers in there. And then obviously we'll need the other side billet, which will have the holes in there to go through the buckle. Now I will cut these out of the same 9/10 ounce leather that we cut the belt blank out of. If you want to line your billets, you certainly can. And then I would cut those out of somewhere around a 5 ounce weight, and then line those with maybe a 2-3 ounce. You can do a 3/4, but it's going to make it a little bit heavier, because not only are you making it thicker, but you're also making it more firm by laminating two pieces of leather together. And anytime you do that, especially with veg tan, you're going to stiffen the temper in that leather. And so whenever I'm doing billets, I like to keep them single ply, 9-10 ounce leather. Just make a really nice clean billet. I think they function a little bit better. They're not quite as bulky. You got to remember, with a Ranger belt, they add a lot more bulk in the front when a man wears it, and so we want to kind of keep some of that bulk down if we can. And so we're going to cut those out here in a minute. I'll cut those out by hand, but first thing we've got to do is do our sizing on our belt. So let me show you how we're going to do that, and we'll go through that right quick, because it is a little bit different than the way you would measure for a normal belt. Okay, so we've got our belt blank here, and we need to size this for a 36-inch Ranger belt. Now, I'm just building this belt for the video. I don't really have an order, but I usually, if I'm building a belt just to try out a pattern, I don't know why 36 usually is the size that I choose. It's probably a real common size. But anyway, so I've got my piece here, 1.5 inch wide. I've seen a lot of Ranger belts 1 5/8. I've seen them 1 3/8. You can do them any size you want widthwise. I find that 1.5 inch for a standard Western Ranger belt works best. It's very common, and it's going to fit through most belt loops in most Western type jeans or even Western slacks. So we're going to go ahead and cut this belt to length for a 36. This measurement, I'll walk you through how I get the measurement that I'm going to tell you. If you remember, on a regular belt, when we're doing just a regular belt for a trophy buckle, we always add 10.5 inches to the measurement that the customer gives you. That measurement that they get is not the measurement written on the belt that they're wearing currently. It's not the measurement from bend to end. It's not the measurement from bend to center hole. It's not the measurement that their wife said it was, or their pant size +2, or whatever it is. The measurement that the customer needs to give you if you're going to build a belt. And I'm very adamant about this with my customers, because I've built too many belts in my career that didn't fit, and it's all because the measurement wasn't correct to start with. The measurement you need is a measurement from the bend, not unsnapped, leave the buckle on it, but from the bend all the way down to the hole that they wear it in. So it doesn't matter if it's the tightest hole in the belt, the loosest hole in the belt, or a hole that they added with a screwdriver because they lost a bunch of weight or something. That's fine. I just need to know what hole they're in with the type of buckle that they're going to wear. So if it's a trophy buckle, that's taking care of that measurement for you for the buckle. As long as they're going to wear this belt with a trophy buckle, if they give you that measurement, bend to the hole they wear it in, then it'll work fine. And so on a Ranger belt, it's much the same way. But you need them to measure a Ranger belt, or at least a tapered belt with the style of buckle they're going to use on this belt that you're making for them. If they do that, it'll work right, because your belts are going to be longer in a Ranger style or tapered style with a nice little buckle set. They're going to be longer belts than what you would wear with a trophy buckle, because a trophy buckle is so wide that you're going to need a shorter belt to be able to wear that buckle, if that makes sense. So if your customer only has trophy buckles but is having a Ranger buckle made and needs a Ranger belt, I would wait till that belt buckle is finished, and then you have the belt buckle. You can mock up just a scrap piece of leather like this with that buckle on it, have that customer put it on, find out what hole they're in. That's the quickest and truest way of getting a solid measurement for making them a Ranger belt, because a Ranger belt's got a lot more bulk in the front of it, and so you've got a lot of things you've got to consider when you're measuring one of these off. And so if you can get them to do that, that works out a lot better. Trying to guess, I can guarantee you 9 times out of 10 the belt's not going to fit. And so you need to be sure that you get a good measurement to start with. So I know that's a lot of information, but I built a lot of belts in my career, and I've messed up a lot of them, and I've had a lot of them that didn't fit when the customer came and got them, and I don't want you to have to go through that. So we're going to go over that anytime I get an opportunity, so that you guys are getting good opportunities and good measurements so that your product fits properly. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to assume the customer already wears Ranger belt. He measured his that he's wearing, and he sent me a measurement of 36 inches. So we got to build him a new Ranger belt for the same buckle he's got on his old one at 36 inches. So what we're going to do is, the only difference between this and not the only difference, but another difference is, I only do a 6-inch tip length on Ranger belts. Some buckle sets will require a longer or a shorter tip length. And again, that's where having that buckle set in possession kind of can help you figure that out. If maybe you need to go to a 5.5 or a 6 1/4, 6.5, whatever it takes to keep that buckle, loop, maybe double loop, and tip where they're all even when the man's in the center hole of the belt. That'll make that buckle set look really nice. If you make your tip too long, the tip, that silver tip on the end of that billet, will eventually start to sag, and it will cause the tip to just kind of wing out there, and it's always hanging out there in the wind there, getting caught on stuff. So I like to keep those all grouped together with the same amount of space in between them all. But anyway, I find 6-inch tip length is just about right on a Ranger style belt. So what we'll do first is we'll come in here. I'm going to show you how this math works out. We're going to put a mark at 6 inches from the tip. And this is going to be our whole end of our belt. And that 6 inch, that's how much tip length we're going to have. Then I'm going to come from that tip length, I'm going to come all the way down to our 36-inch mark on our tape measure. Holding that on that 6-inch mark, come down to 36. I'm going to put another mark. That is where our buckle is going to be. So that is basically our bend, okay? And so usually on a regular belt, you're going to add another 3.5 inches there from the bend to here so that you have enough to fold under to put your snaps. But we're not doing that. This is a Ranger belt. So we don't need that 3.5 inches, but we do need some distance. So what I'm going to add here is 1 inch. I find that 1 inch is usually plenty. And so we'll make a mark past that 36 mark here to add 1 inch right there. And we'll cut that belt off right at that mark. Now that is the cut length for our belt body. We've got that right there. That is a 36-inch belt in a Ranger style. So basically we added 6 inches on this end, 1 inch on this end for our hanger, and so that is going to be 7 inches. So we're going to add 7 inches total to what length they give us. So if your customer sends you a measurement of 36 inches, you'll add 7 inches onto that. So that'll be 43 inches is what the belt body needs to be cut. And so we'll measure this right here and check it. 43 inches is what this belt body is. So that is your finished cut length. The belt's ready to be put together. Now all we've got to do is find our placement for where we're going to put our billets so that they're even on both sides, and we'll be ready to start tooling all the parts for this belt. Okay, so I got me some 9/10 ounce skirting leather, same leather that we cut the other belt out of. And so now we'll cut both of our billets out. I'm just going to line this up on here, and we'll cut these out right quick. Okay, so we've got our billets cut out. Again, cut out of 9/10 ounce leather. I'm not going to line mine, so I just went ahead and cut them out. These are 3/4 inch wide billets. If you want to get a wider billet, it is widen it out just a little bit. The back end of these things would probably stay about the same. I like this shape, I like this width, but you can go as wide as 1 inch. Most of your Ranger belts, though, are going to be around 3/4 of an inch. I've even seen some 5/8 buckles, but 3/4 pretty common in Ranger belts. One thing is, this is the moment when, if you've got the buckle in your possession for the customer, and I recommend doing that. I recommend if you're doing a Ranger belt, try to get the buckle before you start, because here's a good reason to have it here. One is if there's a tip. Now, I really like Ranger belts when there is no silver tip that's going to go on this leather, because they can be a real booger to put on. Every one of them's different. They don't all attach the right way. They don't all attach correctly. And so for that reason, I prefer not to even have one. I'd rather just see the buckle and a real nice keeper, or possibly 2 real nice keepers. But some people like the 4-piece set, you know, the buckle, loop, and tip, 2 tips or 2 loops, one loop either way. But if they do, especially for that, you're going to want to look at how much room you have inside that tip so that you know how to make the tip of this billet. And that's a good thing to go ahead and size, spec out, make sure that it fits on there, do all your skiving on this piece if you're not going to line it, if you are going to line it, whatever you're going to do to make sure that when you're done with this belt and you're installing hardware, you can get the tip on there and get it fastened on there to where they're not going to lose it in the urinal in the bathroom, right? You don't unbuckle and it flies off. That's not very good. So you want to be sure that that tip is fastened on there well. So I recommend having the buckle set. The other reason is for the width of this. Not everybody's 3/4 of an inch is the same as your 3/4 of an inch. And if the maker of that buckle made it dead on spec'd out 3/4 and you are a 32nd wider on this, that buckle is going to chew your edges that you work so hard to get a nice, shiny, smooth edge on this billet. That buckle is going to chew the edge of that up so bad that that billet's going to look really, really bad after about a week or two. And so one thing I like to do there too is have the buckle so that I can slide that buckle and the loops. I can slide those on and make sure I have enough clearance. A lot of times on your custom sets, they give a little bit of relief in there, so they're a little over 3/4. But I've had many of them that are dead on 3/4 of an inch. Now that's fine because that's what the customer requested. That craftsman knew how to make the buckle. He made it the width that they wanted. But now it's our responsibility as the belt maker to make sure that that thing works and functions properly without trashing our work, right? Because that buckle is, if this doesn't fit through there well, it's going to do that. So you want to be sure that it has enough room to pass through the loops, pass through the buckle, and be nice and clean so that it doesn't destroy the work that you do. So if you can get the buckle set, get it in your possession. You have it during the build of the belt. You can always size these things, make sure everything functions properly. Also, you want, if you do whatever your loop height is, you want to be sure that you're not adding too much. If you are going to line these, you want to make sure you've got enough clearance because this billet will have to go through that loop as well. So you will have a loop height that needs to be more than what this stack of leather is right here. Whenever the loop's on there and this passes through that, it needs to be able to do that comfortably. So just be sure that if you've got the buckle set, check all those things before you go any further, because it's a lot easier to modify these right now before we tool them, paint them, dye them, install them, slick them, all that stuff, and then find out they don't fit. It's very frustrating, and as you can tell, I've had this happen multiple times over 20 years. Many times that has been the case, and it's very frustrating. So anyway, we've got our billets. I'm going to go ahead and put some tape on these just so I'm going to tool these up. So I want to make sure they don't stretch on me very much. So I'm just going to use blue painter's tape on these since we're not going to line them. Even if you are going to line them, I would not put paper on, poster board on these. I would just use tape, box tape, blue tape, whatever you want to use, and that'll be plenty to keep those from stretching out. So now let's get our belt body. We'll get it prepped up for tooling, and I'll show you where the placement of these go, and that way we know where our tooling is going to go on the body. Okay, so we're going to use our patterns here to show you how to kind of line up these billets as far as where they're going to go when you're going to place them on the belt. It's pretty straightforward, but I just want to show you kind of some things to keep an eye out, because these are going to be just like the tapered belts. When you do a tapered belt, which we offer a belt jig for, where I've already done the math so that your tapers are even on the person when they're wearing it. You don't have one way over on the right and one way over on the left or anything like that. They're both even. As long as they're in the center hole on the belt, those tapers will be even. So you want the same thing to be with the ends of these billets. You want those proportional and even on the front of on the person wearing them. So the billet side, or the whole side of the billet, is pretty straightforward. Like I said, we're doing a 6-inch tip from here to here. So you're just going to put that right there at the end of the belt. It'll ride right there at the end of the belt, and you'll mark where it goes on the belt body. But in order to find out on this end exactly where this billet sits, you're not going to really just set it right at the end, because we need enough travel in this, because we will put a bag punch right here for this 3/4 inch piece to slide down over the buckle. Your buckle set will get put on here, or your buckle piece. Your loops get slid on, your buckle will get put on here, tongue through that slot, and then this slot will go down through the body of the belt and snap on the back side of this body of the belt. So we need some room for that travel to make that bend. And so what we're going to do is overhang there. I'm going to tell you real quick, the rule of thumb is, on the way I do them with this pattern, is wherever you put that 1-inch mark, remember on this end, the bend end, this is our bend technically. We added 1 inch to that, and then all I did was dock the ends or belt cut the ends. When you put this jig on there, you put this pattern on there, to mark where this is going to go so you can get your tooling going, you're going to want that mark to basically be in the middle of that 3/4 inch bag punch. That's a 3/4 inch bag slot. You want that mark on the belt to be right in the middle of that. If you do that, that'll give you enough travel to be able to put your snap on the end here, and you won't have a bunch of excess hanging out when we're done. But how did we get there? We got there by putting our billet on this side. We know where this billet goes. It goes right on the end of the belt, and then we put a mark there, and that tells us where the end of the billet's going to go. What you want to do is you want to find your center of your belt. Anytime you're doing anything where things need to be even from side to side, always find the center of your belt. So we'll go from our bend to our center mark, which should be 36 inches, because we're building a 36-inch belt. So 36, half of that is 18. If you're raised in Aransas Pass, Texas, like I was, and your math skills aren't real good, you can always double check. 18 inches from that mark to that. So from here to here is 18. So now, when we put this billet on this end, you make your mark, measure from center, that's dead on 10 inches. So now when we put this over here, we've already used that, like I said, that rule of thumb. Make sure that mark's in the middle of the bag punch. Put you a mark. That right there is dead on 10 inches. So now we know that when we put these billets on this belt, when that person wears the belt, as long as they're in the center hole, these ends of the billets will be directly proportional from side to side on their hips. It won't be cocked one way or the other, or one's not even. They'll be right where they need to be. Just like our taper, if you're trying to figure out a taper for a belt you're making, that's how I figure out the taper too. So if you're just a kind of a side note, if you're going to want to run a taper, you do this end however far in you want your taper, find your center, measure where your taper started, and do the same on this side. That'll make them right. But anyway, this is Ranger belt time, so that's what we're working on. But now we've got marks. I've got a mark here, and I've got a mark here on where our billets are going to end. So now we can get this prepped up for tooling, and then we can take it over to the tooling bench. We can use these as our patterns to draw our border lines, because I don't tool underneath those billets. So that whole part. So when you're doing a Ranger belt, that's one thing to consider, as far as you've got more labor in construction, because you've got to make these billets, you've got to install them on the belt, you've got more snaps, you got a few more things going on, but you're not tooling the entire body of the belt. You're basically tooling from there to there, from the end of the billet to the end of the billet, right in the middle. I guess if you wanted to, you certainly could tool the whole entire thing, but I'll show you what I do whenever I tool it, and we'll show you some of that. But that's how we find out where these billets are going to go. All right, guys, so we're going to get ready to start tooling this belt. Now we've got our billets, and they're taped up. We're ready to go. We're going to tool these as well, and I'll show some of that. We're not going to go into a lot of the tooling. When you're tooling a Ranger belt, any belt patterns will work on these. The only thing you've got to do is modify kind of how they tie in, because they're going to end, like I said, I stopped mine before the billets. So I'm going to do that right now and just kind of get that lined up and get that drawn in. Now if you want, you could certainly come in here and put a center mark on where that billet goes. Remember, we've already made the mark here on where the billet needs to be on this side. This is the buckle side, and so if you want to put a center mark just so you keep it centered, that's fine, but just keep it centered up right down the middle of the belt. And you can see how we have this excess right here on the sides. That's going to show our stitching around the outside of the body of the belt, which I think looks really nice. And so I like to keep the width of this little billet hanger, or the billet actually, to where it's not so wide that it hits the edge of the belt. So whatever you decide to, however you decide to design these. Now I'll go ahead and tell you the length of my billets here if you want to create your own style. The buckle side of mine is 9 inches wide, or 9 inches long, and then the whole side is 14 inches long. And so you can cut them I think those lengths are probably pretty about right. We've made quite a few Ranger belts in the years around, and I've measured tons of Ranger belts that are out there, and so this lengths work good for me. But then on the width, you can just, like I said, you make them for whatever buckle size you need, 1 inch, 3/4, 5/8 even. You know, you can kind of go from there, and then you can create your own little shape here or whatever you want to do. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set that down, make sure it's centered in my belt, and then I'm going to take my pencil and just draw me a line around my pattern, and that's just going to show me where that billet's going to live at the end. And so I'll do that side, and then I'll come over here and do, this will be the hole side where all our holes are, and we've got a mark there. And again, if you want to run you a center line on there, certainly can. And put it on your mark. Make sure you're about centered there. And then trace around that. Now if you notice, I'm only tracing to these points on this billet. I stop sewing right there. When I sew these onto the belt at the end when we're done, I will stop sewing right there, and I will usually come in and do 1 stitch that way, and then I'll come out here and stitch around. And so our stitches will look something like that. That's gonna just tie that in, make that strong, but I need the rest of this up because you've got to get your buckle. If you're gonna go to the tightest hole on this billet, you need some travel from this point up. So we're gonna kind of leave that open. So that's the only thing I sew there. So that's the reason I'm only marking that. And so now we've got that marked. And so we've got a mark there. That's where our hole end will go. We know where the billet's gonna live. And then we've got the same on this side for the buckle side. And what I like to do when I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do on a belt, on a Ranger belt, is go ahead and set my dividers for my border width, whatever we're gonna do for that. And then I'll just kind of make some light marks in there because I'm going to draw a new pattern for this belt. And so we'll just do one there and do one on this side. So as you can see, this is coming in here pretty close to where our actual billet's going to stitch in. And so I don't need to try to tool up inside here. That's way too small. If you look at that distance right there, there's no way we're going to get anything in there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set my wing dividers to a little closer distance, and I'll put us a couple little marks that I can hand draw our little border here. So then I know I've got these little marks right here. That just makes sure this distance is the same around the end of the billet, and then I can just connect those little dots. And then all I've got to do is just reset my calipers or my wing dividers here to our border width. And then connect that there. And so now you can see where our tooling will be. So that billet will be sewn on right there. The tooling will start right behind it. Now if you're not doing a hard border, if you're doing a pattern that's open, then you can do whatever you want to. You can have some vine come up in here and frame this out around the the end of the billet, whatever you want to do. There's a lot of creative ways to do it. You can also kind of have a blank spot in there and then come over here and then tool underneath that billet if you'd like. I don't see a point in doing that just because you're gonna have snaps and buckle and all that kind of stuff. So we're just gonna make us a window on this end, and then we'll go down here on the other end and we'll make the same deal, and then we'll draw a pattern in here. We'll begin tooling. I'll show some of that, but we'll get this thing tooled, dyed, painted, all of what we're going to do, antiqued, anything like that, and get our billets tooled, and then we'll be ready to start putting this Ranger belt together. Okay, so we got all the tooling done. I went ahead and did a two-tone black with a antique finish on all the pieces. So the body of our belt and both of the billets. We went ahead and tooled them, dyed them, antiqued them, finished them, just like you would any other project. So these pieces are done. And so now we're ready to begin assembly. Now, real quick, a little side note on this, just one little tip. I ended up dyeing, I wanted to do a two-tone black here, but what I did was I always mix my black with a little bit of brown, and that tends to help fixate that black dye or that black pigment so you don't get quite as much rub off or migration with that black. Black's kind of a pain to deal with sometimes. And on this one in particular, I actually did more brown than I did black, and it gave me kind of a really, really dark chocolate color, and I was really happy with this. So it's maybe hard to see in the video, but in person, this is more of like a really, really dark chocolate color. And I thought it turned out pretty cool. So I was just kind of messing around with dyes since we're just building this one for this video. So anyway, we've got our billets, we've got our body. What we're going to start with is I'm going to start with a little short billet right here. We've got to do some skiving because we don't want these billets quite as heavy all the way down. We want them to kind of vary a little bit in weight. We're not going to really line these and sew these. We're going to, you can line them and sew them if you'd like. I prefer to keep these billets single ply just so that they're a little bit easier to manipulate and deal with. The user of the belt, the owner of the belt, it's just a lot less bulk. And so I don't waste the time to line my billets unless it's kind of requested or unless I'm just kind of feeling like I want to go ahead and do that. If I do, I will not cut my billets out of 9/10. I would then cut them out of 5/6. We may have mentioned that earlier in the video. But these are 9/10 ounce billets, and so what I'm going to do is go ahead and just skive them where they need to be. We don't have a custom buckle and tip that we have to try to get on the tip of here and think about all that. We're just going to do a standard buckle on this, just kind of cowboy style, just for the video. And so all we're going to do is just kind of prep these to install. And so I'm going to show you where we're going to skive. We're also going to skive the body of the belt on each end. That's going to be very purposeful in the way we do that, so that we're trying to reduce some of the bulk that's in front of the user of the belt, the person wearing it. So it's not quite as bulky in the front there whenever they're trying to buckle everything together. So we're going to go ahead and start doing our skiving. Basically on this buckle end, the piece that holds the buckle on, where you're going to want to skive, if you can kind of think about it, is basically where the buckle is going to be attached. We're going to want to take the end of this down some, and I'll basically do it right behind where the bag slot is. We haven't punched that yet, but we did mark it off of our pattern, and so we're going to go ahead and skive some of that down. It's not going to be down to nothing, but basically we want it to be able, it's going to have to pass through the body of the belt at the end here, and then make its way through and then button up underneath there. And so what I want to do is I want to make that thin enough that it can make that passage through that bag slot on the body with a snap attached to it, because we're going to have to attach a snap. So but we also want it strong enough that it's not going to wear out very easily. So we're just going to skive that down some. Then I also like to skive down the tail ends of both of these billets, just so that they're not quite as thick, because we want to try to limit the amount of like belt loop catch. So as they pull the belt out of the jeans to, you know, take the belt off, get a new pair of jeans, whatever, we don't want quite as much here where it's going to catch that belt loop as you're trying to slide the belt out of the pants or put the belt on. So we want to kind of take this down some here towards the end, and that way that kind of does that. So if you can envision, we'll take it down somewhere in that neighborhood. Somewhere in that neighborhood, we'll kind of level that off. So I'm going to show you that here. And I just take my little safety skiver, and I'm just going to, you want a long gradual taper. Don't take off too much at one time. Take your time, and just a little bit at a time till you think you've got it about where you need it. It's comfortable for you. And you can see there how we've got a nice long taper there, down to this much, and I think that's probably going to be enough. It may take you one or two of these, of doing these Ranger belts, to figure out your kind of sweet spot on where you want to be heaviness wise on these billets, but that usually works for me. I don't make a lot of Ranger belts like I mentioned before, but I'm just kind of going off of what I would like to feel. And you can definitely make these thinner single ply. If you don't want them 9 ounce, you could definitely, especially if you got a bench skiver, you could pull those down, or just do it by hand like I'm doing here. I do have a bench skiver, but I feel like doing it by hand gives me a little bit more control. I'm not pulling the leather through a machine, so I'm not potentially stretching it, making it longer than I intended it to be. So here you can see that as well. We kind of got that. And this I might take down just a little bit more than I did on the other end, but we want a long gradual taper. We don't want it to be real abrupt. And that right there will be nice. It'll have a little bit of an edged raise right there, but it's not going to be super bulky. And so here on the buck, or the whole end, we're going to do the same thing. And this leather is skiving really, really nicely, just dry. But if you need to, you can always spray it with a little bit of water, and that will help your skiving and get a little bit more control. Make that skiving just a little bit easier. But this stuff here is skiving really nice. So we got those. Now remember, on the whole side, the long billet, if you do have a tip that comes with the buckle set, you're going to want to go ahead and Make sure that that fits this. You might have to do some skiving on this end to get the tip to where it will slide onto this leather. So that now's the time to check that, not when the belt's done. We want to do any kind of carving or you know, little cutting or way or whatever to get that tip on there, thickness wise and width wise. We're going to go ahead and do that now, and before we do any of our edging. It's going to save you a lot of grief if you go ahead and do that now. And then here's our body. And this is the buckle side here, the shorter side that's not tooled. And so we're going to skive down, again, this area right here at the end. And I'm just going to take it down some. We are going to line this belt. And so with doing that, I want to be sure I go a little bit thinner than I might usually go. So that that liner doesn't compensate and make it too thick at the end. So, but if you're not lining your Ranger belt at all, you might not take it down quite as much as I'm doing here, but you just want it where it's not quite as bulky right here. Again, a long, gradual taper. And so you can see there about how thick I got that. It's probably down, if I had to give it an ounce, both of these are probably down to around the 6 ounce weight, maybe 5 ounce right here, right at the tip. Just, again, might take you a few of them, just kind of feel what feels best to you. Now this is the longer side. This will be the side for the hole side, and we're going to go ahead and take that down. Now remember, when we put this belt on, this long side with your holes in it, this will pass underneath the buckle side. And then of course your buckle piece is on there, then this is going to be on there. So what I'm going to want to do to limit the amount of bulk that this belt creates is I'm going to want to take this down pretty good. Maybe I'd say maybe halfway down. Start bringing that down to about a 5 ounce out here on the end. If you're lining it, you may even go a little bit less, but start bringing that down. This does nothing as far as strength of the belt. There's not going to be any holes in here for the buckle to chew up. This is basically just going to slide in behind where your buckle is, and then your billets will be on top. So we can go fairly thin here. So I'm going to start about halfway down that distance and just gradually, nice and neat, nice and clean, bring that down to thinner here on the end, and that's going to allow me to, or allow that belt to be comfortable when the customer's wearing it. So I'm starting out light right at first, and then as that knife travels, I'm starting to go a little bit deeper into that leather, get a little bit more off as we get to this end out here. And again, you got a bench skiver, like an Osborne bench skiver, you can certainly just play around with that, get it adjusted, know where you're supposed to be, and then just put this end in there and pull it through and it'll take it off. I prefer to do these by hand. Now to get this just right, this is feeling a little bit harder than the two little billets. So I'm going to, just to really finesse this in, I added just a little bit of water. Because this end of the belt, the tip end is always going to be my butt end of the hide. And so that's where your leather is going to be more dense, tighter fiber, tighter grain. And so sometimes they can be a little trickier to skive. The biggest thing is when you're skiving something like this and you start feeling it like it's doing to me, where it's kind of almost looks like it's glassing over a little bit and it's grabbing your knife and trying to divot out, is just take your time. Sometimes a brand new blade will cause more problems than kind of a slightly used blade. So I'm kind of just, because I want it even and smooth, I don't want it choppy, so I'm just taking my time, just letting it take off the high spots there in those little divots, because I don't want to take off too much. All right, guys, so we got those billets edged and slicked. I'm gonna let those dry a little bit before we put dye on those. While we're letting those dry, we're gonna go ahead and get our belt body here that we've already skived the ends on. And I cut a piece of 3/4 ounce Herman Oak veg tan lining material, just like my other belts. We're gonna go ahead and put that and glue that onto the body. We'll glue it on, get a good adhesion there, make sure that it's glued really good. We will groove that, and then we'll stitch it on the sewing machine. We'll trim it, we'll edge it and slick it, go through all of that, and then this belt will be ready for our billets to be installed, and then we'll have to make all our keepers and everything. So let's get this glued up, and then we'll get it sewn. All right, guys, so I went ahead and dyed all the edges of our belt body here as well as our billet, so they're ready to go. We also went ahead and cut a piece of 1/2 inch wide 5 ounce leather. I'll try to keep this fairly light. This is for the keeper. You'll see where that goes here in just a minute, but you need just anytime I do something like this, as far as making little keepers, the little keepers on the gun slings that we make, the piece that you got to make for the bottom strap on that, go ahead and cut you a long piece and then slick that out and dye it or crease it, whatever you're going to do, and then you can just cut off however much you need every time you need a keeper and you got them hanging up or in a little tote bin underneath your bench. Then you don't have to go cut and fiddle with just a little short piece that's a perfect size. Always kind of cut that long. So we've got a piece here that's black that I just made up, 1/2 inch wide, 5 ounce leather. We're going to cut our keeper out of that. I'll show you all that here in just a minute. First thing we're going to do is go ahead and install these billets. And so as you can see on this belt, we've got it all lined. It's done. The belt body itself is actually completed. It's all done. So what we're going to do is, first off, is we're going to go ahead and punch a couple bag slots. And so the first one is going to be inside this buckle end billet. This is the shorter of the two billets. We're going to have to put that 3/4 inch bag punch here on a 3/4 inch buckle for a 3/4 inch buckle. Then we're also going to do a 1 inch slot right here at the end. I go ahead and do 1 inch because you're going to need a little bit more room when we get a snap on the end of this to get that through there. Try not to, get yourself cornered up and trying to make it 3/4 since this is 3/4. Let's just put a 1 inch right there, and we've got plenty of room to pass that billet tip through there. And so we'll go ahead and punch those right quick, and I'll be right back. I'm just going to go punch those, and then we'll be ready to kind of groove these and get them installed. Okay, so I went ahead and punched my bag slots, 3/4, 1 inch right there. If you've got a 7/8 inch bag slot, you can definitely do that. I just like to have it a little bit oversized. That we got plenty of room to work with, because that billet's going to sew on right there, and this end will go down after we put our buckle on. We'll go down through there and then snap here on the end. So we'll set some snaps on there, and so we've got to get that, it's got to have room to pass through there. So that's how it's going to go. And so we're going to go ahead and mount these billets. Now if you're sewing your billets, then you're going to want to sew them. If you're lining them and sewing them, when you make those billets, you got your liner on. You might even stop your liner short here so that, again, this tail stays a little thin. But you're only going to sew from these points over to here, because then we've got to sew from here down and back around when we sew it on the belt. So we want to be sure that that's not sewn when you sew your liner on. All right, so I'm just going to take my groover here and make me a groove line on where I'm going to sew these billets on, just like we do anytime we sew something. And I've got a pretty small border on this. It's pretty tight. I like the way that looks, but if you can see that in the video, that's a pretty narrow border. So it's gonna be real tricky kind of staying in there. But I like that look. But if you're, if you're a little fearful of trying to sew right in that tight of a border there. Make it wider. It's just I do that on these billets a lot of times because they're already so narrow. I want to have plenty of room to tool. So that's the only place we're going to sew, from each point around to there. And so these will be on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and mark this. Now you can't see it in the video, but I've got a little mark right there, and that's where we originally marked from center where that billet end will go. And so if we put it right there, you can see that that slot is about halfway across this bag punch. And so if we do that, you'll end up about right. If you just want to eyeball them, you don't necessarily need to measure from out center each time. As long as your billets are the same size, I'll give you that measurement again as far as lengths of my billets. This one's 9 inches long. This one here is 14 inches long. Just kind of the measurements that I figured or have learned that work the best as far as making Ranger belts. So we're going to center that up in between the stitch line on the body of the belt. Center up our point right there, and I'm going to put a little tracing around this billet here, just so I know about where glue goes and where this is going to go back. And we don't need a ton of glue. You don't have to get crazy. We're not bonding this thing or laminating this billet in place. We're going to sew it, so I'm not really that critical. Not to mention this belt, whoever buys it, if they wear the billets out over time, we can replace those billets fairly easily. But what I'm going to do is just put some glue right down the center of it. I just need the glue to hold it while we sew it. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to line that back up where it went. Be sure that I'm in my tracing, or at least centered on that belt. And then I'll press down right down the middle here. And then I'm going to pick that up. And you can see it transferred some glue right there. So we'll just have to reline it up once that glue dries for just a second. And now we'll do the same thing here. And usually when I'm doing this, I'm not going to trace it, but you do whatever you need to do to kind of feel comfortable about where you're putting it. But I usually just kind of eyeball them. They're pretty easy to get centered up. And so I usually just start at my point, hold that down, line up those side points, make sure they're centered between the stitch line, give it a push, and now we'll let that dry. We'll let that dry and get tacky just for a minute, and then we'll come glue them on. Alright, so our glue has gotten tacky, so I'm just going to go ahead and again set that down where it goes. Center it up. Now if you notice on this, we have not punched our holes for our buckle or anything yet. I like to wait until I've got the billet sewn on to do that. It makes it a little difficult sometimes. You got a little more to deal with. But I find if you'll just wait, you can punch those holes through all the layers at one time. You know you got them where you need them. They're proper, and it just makes it easier for me. But if you'd rather mark those and punch all your holes before you glue them on and set all your snaps and do all that stuff, you certainly can. I just like to wait till the end. We'll get this on there. If you want, give it a little tap with a hammer, make sure you got good glue, and then tap that tail end down to where it wants to kind of lay down in there real nice. Now one thing that I have seen people do, we were in Bryan College Station for a long time, and so we had the Huntsville Penitentiary there near us. We got a lot of belts in, or I've seen a lot of belts over the years that some of the inmates had done, and they do amazing work. And I'd seen one time where a guy had gone in there and cut in the body where this billet sat, cut underneath there, or beveled them. I think he cut it, but he just did a really nice job, and the tip of that billet just slid up underneath that little feather. And that kept it from hooking the belt loops of the pant whenever you go to, move the belt around. And that was probably one of the nicest jobs on a Ranger belt that I had seen. Just a lot of attention to detail. Haven't really seen any others done that way, but that may be a common practice for belt makers on Ranger belts, is to either bevel a spot where this tip comes in, when you're doing the tooling on the body, maybe bevel that, and that'll kind of give that a little inset where that thing can set down in there where it's nice and smooth. But I find, just for me, using a hammer and just skiving it down properly, and then when I put it on there, just trying to get that as shallow as possible right here, that helps with that quite a bit. So you can see it's still sticking up some, but it's not super crazy. It's just kind of how I do ours. So now we'll carry this over to the sewing machine and go ahead and sew these billets in place. Okay, so we got those billets sewn on. And so I might have mentioned earlier, but sometimes if I'm doing a plain or rough out Ranger belt, I will a lot of times come in here and do a diagonal stitch, just like one this way and one this way, and that just helps with that tension on that thing. But on a tooled one, I don't have room in that border, so we just went ahead and went straight. Not sure if I mentioned that earlier in the video, but y'all may have seen me do that on some other things and some other project videos, but it's not mandatory. It's just kind of a nice little touch. But now we'll cut these stitches nice and short, and then we'll be ready to get our little keeper made and set all our snaps. Okay, now on this keeper, what we're going to do is we're going to cut one end completely square. And so I've got just a flush square cut right there. And what we're trying to make space for with this keeper, this is how I do any kind of keeper I'm going to do, is I'm going to get where it's going to go, put the two pieces together that need to pass through there. Because remember, this is going to go, turn it back the way it's actually supposed to go. This will be through here, and then this main part of the belt will pass behind, and then your buckle hole in will go through the buckle right there. And so we're going to need a keeper to keep these two from separating. So what we're going to do is take this piece here, get some of this, I'll turn it this way so I get this billet out of the way. We've got them both together. I'm going to hold this keeper material right in the middle and hold these square, bring this around, pull it fairly snug, and then I'm going to make a mark just a hair away from actually where this one here stops, where this side stops. That is going to give us just a little bit of gap, so when we sew it, it's nice and snug. I don't want it really loose. And so now we can cut that square. And now all we've got to do is make this keeper. Now, if you do a lot of keepers, or you have the staples, I think Weaver Leather sells some staples that you can use for keepers like this to hold those together. Those work great. I don't have those, so what I always do is just punch a hole on each side, a number 2 hole or number 1, just smallest hole you got, punch one on each side, and then we'll lace that together. So I got a little piece of tiger thread here, just a piece of scrap, and I'm just going to punch this. This is a 1/2 inch strip. I'm just going to punch one hole. Number 2 is the smallest one I have. Number 1 would be way better, but and then we'll just butt those together. Grab the better end here. Pull that through there. And when you're doing this, you don't have to go around 100 times or anything. Just a few times is plenty. Just something to hold it together is all we're doing. And we'll just put our knot on the outside here. So I want around there about 2 or 3 times, and then I just tie a secure overhand knot. And then we'll burn that down. And I'll just keep that from coming loose. And so there's our little keeper there. And so we can test it if you want. It's going to go underneath this billet here. And I'll show you when we do our snaps kind of where you can put it kind of wherever you want up and down that line. But then this will pass through there like that. And then of course your buckle will be on and your billet will come around. So now we're ready to set some snaps. So we'll go do that. Okay, now setting snaps on these. Again, if you have the buckle set, it makes it a lot easier because you can go ahead and put the buckle on it. Make sure some buckles, the hanger bar where the tongue is, will be heavier or thinner depending. You might need a little bit more room, so exactly where this snap goes through here may need to adjust a little bit. So if you have the buckle set, it makes it much easier. We don't have that. I actually don't have a buckle set for this belt. We're just going to put it on the retail floor. So we're not going to be mounting a buckle. So I'm just going to show you how I do my snaps if you don't have a buckle. But we'll just go ahead and set this. I want to leave a little bit of slack in there, just a hair, just so we've got room for the keepers, whether there's a single or a double, as well as this one. And so I'm going to set this snap first. Okay, so I got my number 5 hole punch. I'm using number 4, whatever you got for your snaps. And then we'll just set this on here, and I'm going to go through all 3 or both layers, keep it centered, and punch my hole. So now that's where that snap will go. Now I like to keep a snap right back here, right past that bag slot where the buckle goes. I like to keep a snap there, and that way it's going to hold the buckle in place. The buckle's not going to wobble around. And so I'm just going to put that. Got to kind of eyeball it, but I'm going to set that one right there, go all the way through the belt. Now I'm going to hold that as if a snap was in it. So now what I want to do is, you need to think about whether you have 2 keepers or 1 keeper. I'm going to set this up like we have 2 keepers because I don't know, because this belt will be for sale. So I want to be able to allow people to do that either way. So I'm going to set, basically I'm going to spread the next 2 out. So I'm going to have 3 snaps, 1 at the buckle, 1 behind the first keeper, 1 behind the second keeper. You don't necessarily need this one back here, but I find if you don't put it in there, that last keeper will walk quite a bit. So I don't want it walking around. I'd rather have them stationary where they don't really move around. It looks a lot better. And so what I'm going to do is kind of measure. You can measure all this if you want to. I just kind of eyeball it. We're about 3 inches to here. And so if I did one at 1.5 inches and a one at 3, we would probably be fine. So if I set another one right there, that distance should give me plenty of room to have a keeper in there. Then I'll go another 1.5 inches back to about right there. That 1.5 inch distance will usually give you enough space for a belt keeper, belt buckle keeper. If you get a real wide one, again, that's whenever having that buckle set will really help you, because then you'll know exactly where to set your snaps. If I'm doing it with a buckle set here, like I said, I'll mount that. I'll put both keepers on, put the buckle on there, snap it in place, and then I'll set my snap where it needs to be to keep that buckle tight so it doesn't walk back and forth. And then I'll move this keeper up, the first one up, get it where it's centered nice, where I can comfortably set a snap. I'll do that, and then I'll get this other keeper spaced the same distance away so that all 3 pieces are equidistant from each other. Then I'll set my next hole. If you're doing retail belts or just, you know, non-commissioned belts and you don't know what kind of buckle, then I advise just kind of spacing them out evenly, and that way hopefully whatever the buckle set is they might have, hopefully it'll work. But you didn't make it for that set, so we're just kind of going off of that. And while we're punching holes, we'll go ahead and punch our other holes. Remember, on a Ranger belt, our hole length is, or our tip length on our billet is 6 inches and not 7 inches. So we're going to come from the tip to there 6 inches, and then 1 hole on each, or 2 holes on each side, 1 inch apart, and that'll give us our hole spacing. And don't make a mistake when you punch these holes through here and hold it on the deal and go through this too. You only want them in the billet on that side, right? And it sounds funny, but I've seen it happen. So now we need to set all our snaps. I'm going to go ahead and set these 3 first, and then we will set this other one, because these are going to be basically standard. This one here is going to be a little bit different how we're going to do it. I had to grab my bigger anvil. A little taller anvil sometimes will help setting these little snaps. Okay, so we've got our top snaps. Snap those in place. Test them out. Okay, so we've got our snaps set in place there. This one is going to go up underneath, like we said earlier. So what we're going to do is we're going to set this one on the top here so that it looks nice, and then we'll have the other side with the little post underneath there. And if you're doing your belts with Chicago screws, then this is a lot easier, but you've got to deal with Chicago screws. So it's kind of completely up to you how you like to do it. So the way this snap is going to go, it's going to go down through and then snap under here. So what we're going to do is we're going to set our button end on this side here, so when this comes around, it'll snap up underneath there. And so that's what I was saying, it's a little bit different. You got to kind of pay attention to how your snaps are going to go in. But we'll set this here, female side, so that the male side can come up there, and then we'll put our cap. Okay, and now we'll set our male side coming up this way. It's a little thinner, so we might have a little trick trying to set this one. Okay, now you can see how we've got that little male side there. That's what I was saying, you need to be sure you got a wide enough bag slot to where that can make its way through there. If you make that bag slot too tight, it might be a little harder to get that snap in there. And then it's going to snap underneath right there. Brand new snaps are always a trick to set, or to get snapped for the first time. There we go. And so that's how that thing, and now you've got your buttons all on the top. so you don't have any of them that look kind of different. Okay, that's 4 snaps that go on there. Now for our keeper. This is where you can decide. I've seen these keepers set right there. If you're going to set them that close to this end, you're going to have to move that snap back. I prefer that keeper to be over here. We've got enough belt body length that can make it all the way. And so that stays out of the way of my 2 keepers, if there is 2 keepers. And so that way we don't have to worry about making space for that. And then we'll reset this. And now when this belt is worn, if they're in the center hole, we have enough of length on here to where it should still hold the tip of this body in. And that way you've got good stability, the belt's not moving. Now you can move this anywhere you want to, or the customer can anywhere they want to along there. But that's what that keeper is doing, is basically holding that belt in place. And that way all these layers stay together, because this billet will be buckled down and that belt will be all together. And so that's what it looks like on the front. As long as they're in the center hole, they'll be able to wear that exactly where they need it to be, and it'll be just right, balance wise, as far as the billets. Alright guys, so that's making our Ranger belt. As you can see, it's a little bit more work construction wise, but you do have less tooling time, depending on how you look at it. To me, it's just a little bit less tooling, but the construction probably overrides that, because you've got to make the billets, you've got to make the keeper, you got a little bit more snaps, you got a little bit more things to be concerned with in the measurements. But that is the #1 thing. If you get a good measurement when you're making a Ranger belt, you're way more apt to be successful on that belt fitting. It's way more common to have a misfit on a Ranger belt, mainly because people don't measure the person's Ranger belt that they're currently wearing. And if they've never worn a Ranger belt, you're gonna have to mock up, even if you just took a 3/4 inch strip of leather about this weight, finished weight, put their buckle that they had made on there, and then have them put that on. That'll get you really, really close to where you need to be. But be sure that you get a good measurement, because that's gonna save you a lot of heartache. You got a lot of work in these, you don't want any misfits. So demand a good measurement. They're a lot of fun. The hardest thing about these, in my opinion, is cutting out the billets. We do have dies made, we're having dies made for this, both of these billets in a 3/4 inch width, as well as a 1 inch width. So those will be on the website soon. Be sure to go to our website and sign up for the Leathercraft newsletter, so that you'll get a notification or an email when those become available. We're expecting those dies any day from the date this video posted. So if you're watching this video much later in the future, they're probably already on the website. Just go to dgsaddlery.com, go in our store, they're in there. But we are going to offer these as material packs already clicked out of Herman Oak leather, 9-10 ounce weight, and that way you can make your own Ranger belt without having to hand cut these billets. And like I said, they're set up to the way I do a Ranger belt. So the measurements of those, I gave you those in the video. You can certainly make your own style of billets that you want to do, but I find that those measurements are pretty accurate. If you're measuring and doing the tip length and everything else just like I'm doing it, it'll usually end up just right when the person's wearing the belt as far as staying even. But a lot of fun. You can use any belt patterns, you know, any of the belt patterns that are out there in the market. Those will work. The only thing you might have to draw your own of is the billets, which aren't super hard. And in fact, even on a floral tooled Ranger belt, doing just a shell stamp, a shell border stamp along these billets looks really nice and does match really well with the floral, because there's not a whole lot of room in there. You don't necessarily have to do floral tooling on these billets if you decide not to. You can also just do knife work. That looks really pretty as well. But that's making a Ranger belt, guys. I appreciate it. I hope you found this information useful, and we'll see you guys in the next project video.